Good morning, dear students. This is part 5 of chapter 7, that is diversity in living organisms. Already 4 parts of this chapter we have done, and this is part 5. This is the last part of the chapter. After that, chapter will be over. So let me show you what we are going to discuss in this part. In this part, we will discuss animal kingdom. Animal kingdom is divided into two groups, that is invertebrates and vertebrates. Right? So invertebrates already we have discussed in part 4, and now here we will discuss vertebrates. Vertebrates are further classified into species, amphibian, reptilias, aves and mammals. Right? Species are further classified into cartilaginous fish and bony fish. Okay, in some book you will find one more group, that is cyclostomata. Okay, so the characteristics of the animals of these groups we will discuss in this part. At first, let me tell you the characteristics of vertebrata. Actually, the animals of vertebrata group are the animals that have true vertebral column and internal skeleton. Okay, this skeleton allow them a different distribution of muscle attachment and that point to be used for movement. Okay. And the animals of this group are bilaterally symmetrical, triploblastic, coulommic, and segmented, and they have complex differentiation of body tissues and organs. Let me explain what is bilaterally symmetrical. Actually, a body part along a central axis so that the body is divided into equivalent right and left halves by only one plane. That is known as bilateral symmetry. Here you can see this is butterfly, and if you divide the body part into two halves, you will find that left part and right part is exactly same. So that is bilateral symmetrical. Again, if you divide the body of ladybird into two halves, you will find that left and right parts are exactly same. Okay. Here are the characteristics of chordates. Chordates have a notochord. Notochord means a flexible rod that is shaped or it gives a structure to the animal. Okay, here in picture you can see the notochord. Okay, let me show you with the marker. This is notochord. Right, this is notochord. Okay, that is flexible and this give a structure to the body. Right. Chordates have dorsal nerve cord. Dorsal nerve cord is a unique feature to the chordates. It is a hollow cord dorsal to the notochord. And here, just above the notochord, you will see dorsal hollow nerve cord, right? This one, this structure. If you are following the red marker, you will be able to see it clearly, right? Chill. Let me tell you the difference between notochord and nerve cord. Notochord is a skeleton rod, while nerve cord is a solid strand of nervous tissue, right? And the main difference between these two, notochord and nerve cord, is that notochord belongs to the skeleton, right? While nerve cord belongs to the central nervous system. Okay, the chordates are triploblastic. Triploblastic means they have a body that has three cell layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. These are the three layers. Okay, and chordates have paired gill pouches. Gill pouches are the structure that is found in fishes, and the space between the gill plates is called gill pouches. And here in this picture you can see this gill pouches. And these animals are columnate, means they have a body cavity that is called column, and this body cavity with a complete lining most bilateral animals, including all the vertebrates and columnates. Here in picture you can see the body cavity. See here, this is body cavity throughout the body. Okay, this one. And throughout the body, this cavity will be found. Right? So now it is clear that vertebrates are grouped into six classes. Number one, cyclostomata, then fish, and then amphibians, then reptiles, birds, and mammals. Here are the general characteristics of all the groups, and in the same session we will discuss all the characteristics in details also, right? So let me start with cyclostomata. Cyclostomata are vertebrates. They are jawless vertebrates. Okay, and in Greek, word cyclos means circular and stoma means mouth. Their mouth is circular, that is why they are called cyclostomata. And these are characterized by having elongated eel-like body. Elongated body means comparatively they are large, sorry, they are lengthy. The length is more in comparison to their breadth. That is elongated. The mouth, as I told you, their mouth is circular. Okay, and they are slimy skin and they are colorless. They are ectoparasites, or these animals, lamprey and hagfish are the example of these animals. Here in picture you can see hagfish. This is hagfish and that is lamprey. In picture you can see lamprey, and see here you are seeing the circular mouth. Internal structure of the mouth also can be seen over here. Okay. The second group is species. The animals belong to this group are fish and they lay eggs. They are exclusively aquatic animals. They live in water. Their skin is covered with scales and their body is streamlined, and this type of body helps them in swimming. They use muscular tail for movement and they obtain oxygen dissolved in water by using a special structure in their body that is known as gills. Some fish that are having skeletons and made entirely of cartilage, they are cartilaginous fish, and the example of these fish are shark. And some with a skeleton made of both bone and cartilage. These type of fish are called bony fish, and the example of these type of fish are tuna and rohu. Here you can see the fishes. Now we come to the next group, that is amphibians. The animals belong to this group have mucus gland in their skin. Uh, it help in maintaining the water balance and offer protection from bacteria, and they are extremely numerous in fish skin. Amphibians have three-chambered heart. They lay eggs and they are cold-blooded. Cold-blooded means these animals whose body temperature varies with that of the environment. So these animals are known as cold-blooded, right? The animals differ from fish in the way means they have lack of skulls while fishes have skulls. So this way they are different. Respiration in these animals is through either gills or lungs. When they are in water, gills are used for respiration. When they are on land, lungs are used for respiration. These animals are found both in water and on land. Examples of these animals are frogs, toads, and salamanders. Right? So these are the characteristics of the animals that belong to amphibian group, right? Now we come to next group, that is reptilias. These animals are also cold-blooded and they have skulls on their body. These animals breathe through lungs, and most of the animals have three-chambered heart. The exceptional is crocodile. Crocodile has a four-chambered heart, right? These animals lay egg and their eggs have tough covering, and these animals do not lay their eggs in water. Examples of reptilias are snakes, turtles, lizard, crocodile. The next group is aves. The animals that belong to this group are mostly birds, and these are warm-blooded animals. Warm-blooded animals mean the animals whose body temperature does not vary with the temperature of the environment. And these animals have four-chambered heart. They lay eggs, and there is an outside covering of feathers, and two forelimbs are modified for flight in these animals. And they breathe through lungs. As I told you, all the birds fall in this category. The next group is mammals. Mammals are warm-blooded animals and they have four-chambered heart. Mammals have mammillary glands for the production of milk to nourish their young. Their skin has hairs as well as sweat and oil glands. Most of the mammals produce live young ones. Uh, there is an exceptional cases over there like platypus and echidna. These are mammals, but they lay eggs. And some mammals like kangaroos, they give birth to a very poorly developed young ones. Examples of mammals are cat, human, rat, bat, and whale. Here you can see the mammals. As I told you, platypus and echidna, there are two animals. They are mammals, but they lay eggs. Okay. The platypus is referred to as duck-billed platypus. It is semi-aquatic mammals. It lays eggs. Okay, and it is found in eastern Australia. Here is echidna that has spines and it looks like porcupine. It has a beak like a bird. It has a pouch like a kangaroo. Okay, and as I told you, it lay eggs like a reptile. It is also found in Australia. The next topic is nomenclature. Actually, why there is a need to name living organisms? See, it is required to give a scientific name to a living organism. Why? Because in the world people speak different languages. Okay, and to the same object or to the same animal or fruit, they call by different names as per their language or as per their state. If I give you example of potato, so it has different names in different languages. So people of different state, different countries will call the same living organism by different names, and it will be very difficult to study that particular organism. So how to solve this problem? To resolve this problem, scientists were agreed to give a scientific name for the organism in the same manner as we have given scientific names to the chemicals in chemistry. Right? In chemistry, there is only one single name for one substance. So in the same manner, here also in biology, a scientific name is given to the organism and it is same everywhere. Okay, so anywhere in the world you go, one organism will be called or identified by a unique name, and that will be easy for the study of that organism or other organism of that group, right? The system of scientific naming or nomenclature was used was that we are using today was introduced by Carlos Linnaeus, and he is known as father of taxonomy. And taxonomy is the science of classification, right? So here there is an example of potato. We all call it potato. And here the family, order, and kingdom of these potatoes are given. And the scientific name of potato is Solanum tuberosum. And here the scientific name of tomato, Solanum lysoprasium. The scientific name of an organism is the result of the process of classification that puts it along with the organisms it is most related to. Okay, but see, when we actually name the species, we do not list out the whole hierarchy of the group it belongs to. It is not possible. Okay, so instead of whole hierarchy, we just limit to write the name of the genus and species of any particular organism, right? So whenever we are writing a scientific name of any organism, we will not follow or we will not write the whole hierarchy. See, this is the hierarchy of any animal. Okay, this is the hierarchy of cat. But we will not write all these when we will write scientific name. We'll just write the genus and species. Okay. So all over the world, it has been agreed that both these names will be used in their Latin forms, and then it will be a unique name. So when we are writing a scientific name, there are some conventional conventions that should be followed. And the first thing is the name of the genus should begin with a capital letter, right? The name of the species should begin with a small letter. The third point is if the name is printed, then the scientific name should be in italic. And if the name is written by hand, then the genus name and the species name have to be underlined separately. Okay, here you can see the scientific name of human is Homo sapiens. So see, the first point is genus should be written with capital letter. So here you can see H is capital. Okay, and species should start with small letter. So sapiens is starting with a small s and it is printed. So it is written in italic. Okay, and here this is handwritten. So Homo and sapiens both are underlined separately. So this is the way of writing scientific name of any organism. Here is the name of human scientific name of there are four options and you can see and you can find out which one is the correct one, right? So this is the correct one, Homo sapiens, where Homo is starting with capital H, sapien is starting with small s, right? And it is written in italic. Why? Because it is printed, right? Okay, this is the activity for you. You just have to find out names of any animals or plants. So just search on internet and write down the names of the animals. There's no need to find only five. You can write as many as you can. Okay. Now this is exercise from your chapter. Let me read out the questions for you and then let me answer the questions. The first question is what are the advantages of classifying organisms? Okay. As I told you, when we classify the organisms into groups, it becomes very easy to study them systematically. So that is the main advantage of classifying organisms. Okay. So here is the answer. Their common features can easily be studied. The study of scientific experiment is simplified. The interrelation of humans with other entities can be interpreted. Their dependence and interactions can be studied. So these are the advantages of classifying organisms. Now the second question is, how would you choose between two characteristics to be used for developing a hierarchy in classifications? Okay, so when we are classifying, so we will choose these two characteristics for developing a hierarchy in the classification, and they are, the first one is the gross character. Okay, when hierarchy will be failed, then we will choose the gross character. And the further, the next point will be the fine character. Okay, so the first one is gross character and the second one is the fine character, right? The next question is, explain the basis for grouping organisms into five kingdoms. As you know, all the organisms are grouped into five kingdoms. So the criteria to divide them into kingdom is, the first criteria is cell present forms, number of cells present in the organism. That is the first criteria. If you remember, there were unicellular and multicellular animals, right? And then the next criteria is number of layers present in the organism. Okay, and then the next one is existence of cell wall, then mode of intake of nutrition, and then organization level. So these are the criteria in which, in the basis of these criteria, animals are grouped into five kingdoms, right? The next question is, what are the major divisions in plant? So the major divisions in plant are Thallophyta, Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, Gymnosperm, and Angiosperm. Okay, what is the basis for these divisions? Okay, Thallophyta, the basis of classification is their body. They have thallus-like body. And Bryophyta, they are divided into leaf-like structure and stem. In Pteridophyta, they have root, stem, and leaf. And as you know, that gymnosperms are seed-bearing plants, but they have naked seed. Angiosperms are seed-bearing plants, but they have covered seeds, right? Question number 5 is, how are the criteria for deciding divisions in plants different from the criteria for deciding the subgroups among animals? Okay, so answer is here. Let me read it for you. Okay, to categorize plants into Thallophyta and Bryophyta is the basic cell structure, right? Now, gymnosperm and angiosperm are classified on the basis of visibility of seeds. Okay, and to classify animals, what are the criteria? The criteria are cell layers, cytology, morphology. These have taken into consideration when animals are classified. The presence and absence of various features decide the classification of higher hierarchies. Question number 6 is, explain how animals in vertebrata are classified into further subgroups. Okay, so the answer of this question is on next slide. Let me move. Okay, here is the animal kingdom, and these are vertebrates and these are invertebrates. Okay, so vertebrates may fish, amphibians, reptiles, aves or birds and mammals. Okay, so thank you students. This much was there for today's session. Chapter number 7 is over now. Now your today's work is to write down question answer in your notebook. And do one thing, watch all the parts of this chapter again and read the chapter once, and if you have any doubts, note it down and we will solve your doubts in live class. Okay, so thank you students. Now we will meet with a new chapter.